I've systemized over 100 Amazon businesses, from early stage 7-figure sellers to well-established 8-figure brands. And in this video, I'm going to show you how we are systemizing an Amazon brand doing nearly $20 million in sales. You'll see exactly how we are transforming their chaotic operations into a well-oiled, scalable machine. You'll get a step-by-step breakdown of the high-level framework I'm using, so you can apply it to your own business and unlock your next level of scale. So let's get into it. So let's begin with an overview of our framework. Our framework consists of 9 components. Those are divided into 3 stages. The first stage is to systemize. That is all about designing the machine. The next one is to delegate. That is building the right team. And lastly, we have scale, so we can focus fully on what really matters. So let's begin with the systemization. So let me scroll down here to our section, and our first component is the system designer. I always like to begin with actually designing the high-level systems and understanding the core functions of the business. And for that, for each system, we begin with a simple template like this. Of course, where we identify the system name. In this case, it would be the product development. We clarify the objective. That's always to even understand what the purpose and what the function of the system is. Then what helps us to later on map it out is to identify where it starts and where it ends, who is the owner in the business of this particular system, and also the type of the system. So generally speaking, we have 3 types of systems in the business. We have systems that grow the business, we have systems that maintain it, and then we have support systems like finance, HR, and potentially the management of the business, right? What I also like to do is to list out the core activities, right? This is the high-level mapping out of this particular system. So all of the activities that will need to happen, market and competitor research, product idea validation, and so on. And also just get a rough idea what will be the key performance indicators in this particular system. Once we do that, once we fill this in, we can start breaking down the system into processes. Because as you probably know by now, a system consists of interconnected processes, right? So if we take a look at it, at our template, we are using the same formula to clarify what are the processes within this system. As you can see, this is just a template, right? So in our case, it could be research and development, listing content, then let's say product launch evaluation, all of the processes that fit into this particular system. And I know it may sound overwhelming, but we are building the foundation for everything else that comes later on. And we follow the same logic, right? Each process needs to have an objective, start and end, and the owner and potentially other people involved in that process, and again, listing the core activities, right? Because it's very important to even map out what we are going to do later on. And once we do that, again, it doesn't take much time to do this, especially using AI to help us understand how all of these moving pieces actually fit together. But the great part begins later on when we actually start mapping out each process. And I use a template looking like this, where we have all of the people involved in that particular process on the left side, right? So we have the swim lanes, and we can see, as we discussed, what starts the process and where it ends, right? This is important because we need to understand that everything that happens in the business either starts as a routine, as a frequency or some trigger, or it's triggered by another process, right? So end of one process triggers the next. So it helps us understand how everything in the business actually flows. And once we do that, we map out the steps in between. Again, we are keeping it very high level. We don't want to get into too much detail and list every single step. That would be too overwhelming, too complex, absolutely useless, right? So we want to map out, the 5 to 8 key steps that actually need to happen. And here in the section below, I also like to note down the important things, right? If we are using any tool for that, if there is any playbook or SOP required, or potentially what will be the KPI that we want to measure at this particular stage. So if we take a closer look, what it may look like, it can be something like this, right? So we have 3 people involved, product development specialist, the CEO, and let's say a sourcing agent. For our research and development, it is triggered monthly. So on a monthly basis, we ideate new products, generate new ideas, validate new products. Then we see the handovers, let's say to sourcing agent, and everything is mapped out on a high level. As I said, we are not really looking closely at every single step, right? It's just mapping out what needs to happen, where are the key handovers, and who is involved. And at the bottom, we see the important, let's say, tools, our validation spreadsheet, product specs sheet, profitability calculator, potentially some playbooks like ideation framework, validation framework. I don't want to get into too much detail here because we are not talking about product development pipeline. We are talking about the system design, right? That is the first component of the framework, mapping out how these things work, and that is the foundation on which we will build on the whole operating system, right? So once we do that, then you can see the end here feeds into the next process in the line, right? In this case, it would be the forecasting and potentially the listing content creation, which is another process in the product development pipeline. Now, once we do this, we have the strong foundation, right? It may look overwhelming, but if you really follow this simple framework in 3 steps, high-level system, break down into processes, and then map out the processes, you can be done fairly quickly. And I want to stress out that your business doesn't have as many systems as it might seem, right? You may end up with 5, 6 core systems, so it is well worth doing, mapping out the foundation, and even start roughly clarifying the accountability if you have multiple people involved in each process. Now, we will continue to our second component in when we are designing the machine. Once we have the system designed, we can create what I call the execution hub, right? This is where the actual work will happen, because what we created now, we mapped out how things happen, right? In what sequence, what are the high-level workflows. But now we need the remaining parts. We actually need to have a place where we do the actual work, right? So we have the process maps. So we will need company wiki and task management. The first step is to have a company wiki in place, because I like to keep everything together. I like to use Notion because everything will later on be connected with AI. I will talk about that. So it is very useful to actually have this overview, right? So for example, when we design the system, now we can see that our product development pipeline also lives here in our company wiki. Now we know that this particular system is active. We see, what kind of, what type of system it is, who is the owner. We can see potentially all of the playbooks that relate to this particular system. And as I mentioned, that is the company wiki, right? We then have the playbook library where we include how things are done. Again, I want to stress out that we don't really need SOP for every single thing. We are really identifying here, as I showed you, where we might need specific playbooks on how to do that. And again, stressing out, it's not necessary to have it for everything, right? If you are not sure, you likely don't need a playbook, you likely don't need an SOP, right? But if we do, we put it into our library. That's where the company lives, where the company wiki lives, right? That is the single source of truth for the business, where you have all of your systems, where you have all of your playbooks, the team directory, and all of that we will talk about later on in this video, right? So we can then see that each playbook can even stretch out across multiple processes, because I like to build everything in terms of the function, right? Some people prefer form over function. And I think that happens a lot, that they like to keep things neat and super organized. But I actually want to structure them in a way that serves its purpose, that serves the function, right? It helps people to execute better. So when, let's say, we create these playbooks, they can stretch out across multiple processes in the business. It really should reflect how the work is actually done. And what's also important to stress out is culture of documentation, especially now with AI. It's important to have everything in one place, because that will allow us to leverage AI even more. Because the key here is that the company wiki is powered by AI as well, because the AI then has access to all of this. What we will be putting into company wiki, our systems, our playbooks, our team directory, our plans, everything is in one place, and the AI will have access to that, which will make our lives significantly easier. So we have to learn to keep things documented. And again, AI will make it easier for us, and having everything in one place is then very straightforward. So once we do that, once we have the company wiki, the second part of the execution hub is the actual task management, right? Or your project management. This is where the actual task templates live. And again, form over function, right? You set it up in a way that serves the function, not the form, right? So for example, some people do this, that when they design, it's like every single step in our process needs to have a corresponding task in your project management. That's not necessary. Set up your project management on how actually people do the work, right? Maybe you put everything under one parent task, like your purchase orders and your shipments. Maybe you want to split it out. Maybe something will be parent task with detailed description, something will be just a subtask as a checklist, right? Build it how people actually use it. Because if you decide like every single step in my process map will have a number, 1.2.1, and it will be every single task right here, and every single task will have an SOP, you will spend most of your time just, managing these moving pieces and keeping it updated. That's not very useful. Again, form over function, right? So here we will set up the task management reflecting the actual workflows, how people like and prefer to work, right? So once we do that, we have we covered the execution hub, company wiki, and task management. So we can move on to CEO dashboards, which is the third component. In this business, and in many businesses that actually grow, the founder is then getting detached from the daily operations, which of course is the goal, but it may cause some trouble because he still needs to have his finger on the pulse. So we implement something as a CEO dashboard where he can quickly see all of the relevant numbers, the KPIs of the business, right? Of course, the high level evergreen metrics, revenue, margin, profit, everyone is monitoring that. But what about the lead indicators, right? How many product ideas we generated, how many we validated, how many products we launched. And it can go for everything, right? It really depends on the systems that are in the business. Maybe you're publishing content, maybe you're working with influencers. So you kind of want to track the lead indicators as well, not just the lag indicator, which is, let's say, your revenue, your sales, right? So this is important to set this up. And now we are actually also using apps like Lovable to build custom dashboards, right? Because it's fine to use spreadsheet, perfectly fine. Don't overthink it. As long as you have the insights here, for who is accountable for each KPI. But we can set up very convenient dashboards using AI, something like Lovable, to create a custom app where the owner can then see everything in a nice dashboard. They can filter it out. They have interactive charts and everything. It's just a next level of spreadsheets to build a custom app that gives us the summaries, and even using, let's say, AI to share us the executive summary. That it kind of interprets the data and makes it even faster to understand what's going on. Now, the last component in the systems section is Dream Team architecture. And you may ask, why isn't this in the team, right, section? This is important because here we are actually mapping out the ideal team that would run our business. Once we design the systems, we understand how the machine works, and now we sit down and actually take a look, what are the people, what are the roles we need to run this machine, right, to operate this machine. So I always like to remind myself, that the great team is created, not hired. So if you imagine building a sports team, you have some specific roles and you are finding the perfect person for that particular role, right? And the team here is the same. So we first need to understand what our team should look like on paper. And then in the next section, we will be talking about actually building the team. But we need to create the architecture first. So on a high level, we create what the team should look like in terms of functions, right? What are the different functions? And if you are a solopreneur, that's what people tell you, you are wearing too many hats. So let's say if you create an accountability chart documenting the functions of the business and the roles that should be there, maybe your name will be in all of these boxes, which means that you are wearing too many hats. You might realize that your employees might be doing 2 or 3 roles at the same time. So what we want to do is we want to roughly map out what the team should look like. What are the different roles and functions? This is just a template, so don't worry about it too much. But here we are using just documenting, again, on a high level based on the systems we developed. Once we do this, we can continue into our section delegate, building the right team. And here we have talent builder. I always struggle how to call this one, but I call it talent builder. And here, of course, we start documenting as I mentioned in our company wiki, again, culture of documentation, we will map out our existing team. What are their current roles? What are they doing? What are the systems they're accountable for? What are the playbooks they're accountable for? And so on. So we will map out the team right here. And then we take a look at the dream team architecture and our current team. And we will follow these 3 steps. Step number 1 is to identify bottlenecks. That is the audit and evaluation, right? And we do this if you're a solopreneur. We are identifying the bottlenecks to figure out who is the next person to hire. Because that is the bottleneck. It's you. You are sitting in too many seats. You are wearing too many hats. So we identify the bottleneck. But the same goes for your employees, right? Once you have team 3, 4, 5 people, maybe someone is just, a bottleneck because they don't have the capacity. So we will do the audit, figure out if we have the right people in the right seats, right? Once we do that, we will design the desired scenario, which is basically the team redesign. How we take the existing team versus the dream team and what are the changes we need to make in order to get closer to that dream team. And of course, once we do that, we have to create the action plans. So in some cases, it will be keeping the employee as it is, promoting them or moving them into a different role, right? Maybe you have a great person that they might be better to do something else in the business with their skill set. Maybe you need to promote them. They are great. They should have more responsibility, and find someone to replace them at the bottom of the org chart. Or maybe you decide to let them go. Maybe during the evaluation, you realize, hey, they're just not doing a good job. You have to let them go. Or we identify, which is very common, that we need to hire a new person, right? And now the talent builder, what I mentioned, is all about creating these plans and putting it into action, right? Either hiring or some transitions. Transition, if we are decide to let someone go, there needs to be some handover. If you are promoting someone, there needs to be some onboarding period into this new role, right? Or restructuring, if you are moving them into a new role, again, onboarding and training for the new role. But in most cases, we will be hiring, right? So we will actually create a hiring funnel. I talked about this in detail in some of my other videos, so you can definitely find them in my playlist. But what this means is that we create hiring funnels for the role we identify that we need, right? And the hiring funnel, again, traditional job ad, questionnaire, skill test, basically to attract the best candidate. And since we are building that in Notion, we can automate a lot of this stuff, right? If we identify that we need to hire, let's say 3 people, we will be hiring over the next few months. We can automate a lot of this stuff, right? Of course, you can write your job ad with AI. Everyone does that. But let's say if we have the form, the questionnaire, the AI can also filter the candidates for us, send them the skill test and kind of make this process a little bit more seamless for the business, so they don't spend as much time on this. Now, once we do that, we are, in process of transitions, hiring. We can continue into the next section is to design the meeting rhythm for the business. Right? It's important how we are going to communicate. And for this, we will use this framework. And this framework is actually has 2 parts, right? We are going to, for now, ignore the upper part, which is more about the planning and prioritization, and we will focus on the bottom, where we have monthly review and weekly check-ins, right? There, we will have these types of meetings to really help us keep things organized and structured, because in many businesses, the meetings are an absolute waste of time. People are not sticking to a strict agenda, or people that do not have to be on the meeting are attending the meeting and wasting everyone's time, right? So the top will be more about company direction, and the bottom, these 2 are more about the team accountability, right? Keeping everyone aligned and accountable for their goals. Now, we will do the same thing again, as I said, in Notion. We will set up the meeting rhythm. So all of the different types of meetings, the attendees, we will set up a simple automation so the meetings are, regularly created. But it's also what matters, according to our filters, but also what matters is that this is also powered by AI. It doesn't matter whether you use Fireflies or whether you use the Notion AI, that your meetings are monitored and documented by AI. So in this case, we really want to make them as productive as possible. So of course, having the agenda, having a strict structure for that is number 1, but number 2 is actually make sure that the outcomes of the meetings are documented somewhere, right? So the AI will be recording and transcribing our meetings so we can use it for future reference, right? During our meetings, again, I like to remember this rule: no scorecard, no meeting. When we talked about, the CEO dashboard, essentially this idea is that we should always talk about the specific topic, about the specific project, right? And more often than not, that can be quantified, right? So if we have some number we are talking about, let's say we are unhappy with the number of products we launched, or we are unhappy with the performance of the product we just launched. So we always should have some number that we are going to discuss, right? And also in the meetings, remember these rules, the 1-3-1 rule. I mentioned it many times. Every time an employee or teammate comes to meeting for advice, they usually should be able to identify the problem, something they need help with, if there is a problem. If they have a problem, they need to be able to explain what's the problem. They need to come up with 3 possible solutions to that problem and 1 recommendation, right? So you are encouraging the accountability. So the meetings are really quick. So you don't sit there and think together. The thinking has been done before the meeting and you just help them make the right decision. For new projects, we are using the 10-80-10 rule. So if you are assigning a new project, we'll talk about that a bit later as well. The 10%, the direction is done by you. You create the outline of the project, what the task is. 80% the execution is done by the team. And the last 10% again is the evaluation by you. That's, let's say, for a new project, right? You decide to launch a new product line or something like that. And as I mentioned, the company wiki, AI, culture of documentation, why we are actually using the AI, let's say, to record these meetings. Well, let's say for this seller that we are working with, there are many meetings, right? There's COO working with other employees, of course, managing the team. So he has many meetings during the week. And they had a meeting at the end of the week where they talked about, with the founder, when they talked about what was discussed with everyone else. Well, if you use the AI to actually transcribe that, the AI can send a report to the founder where you can see, okay, so this was discussed with this person, these were the outcomes, the action items, and it can send you the report. So for example, this is just an image I got from the internet. That's not necessarily from the system we are setting up here. But the way it works, that you can then ask, because everything is documented, every single meeting, as long as you start using it and you do that properly, you can ask questions like, hey, I remember we decided to, let's say, pause this campaign. When was it? And the AI can find it. Hey, it was 3 months ago on this meeting with Max. You decided to do X, Y, and Z, right? Or maybe you are not even on those meetings. The founder at the end of the week can sit down and ask like, hey, what Max and John discussed on this meeting? And it will tell you, right? Or it can send you an automatic report, which is what we are trying to do with AI to streamline the communication and, the data interpretation and all of that. So very, very important to keep everything under one roof. The last component of our team section is the comms stack, right? Understand the communication, how we are going to communicate in the team. The more people you have, the more complex it gets. And again, we don't want to waste anyone's time. So we define what are the different tools we are using. Maybe we are using Slack, we are using Asana, we have Notion, maybe you have Loom for recording video, maybe you have some email management software. It can get out of hand very quickly. So what we want to do is to create a communication architecture where we define what the tool stack is, what goes where, like, hey, this goes to Asana, this type of message goes to Slack, and also rules of engagement. Like, what are the rules for, let's say, DMing the founder? What should be the required response times from your employees if there is something urgent, right? Something urgent, go to Slack, message, what are the required response times? Asynchronous and synchronous communication, right? Calls versus, let's say, recording a Loom video, right? Async communication should be always more efficient. You record a Loom video and the person can play it whenever they want, and also they can, play the video on 2x speed so they get it done faster. So it can look something like this, the two communication rules, what in Asana, how to use the tool so everyone uses it in the same way. That will save you so much time. What goes to Asana, what goes to Slack, and how to even use these tools. So clarifying the rules, the best practices, and also then clarifying as a part of the communication how the team, will be keeping everyone on the management updated. End of the day reports or some weekly summaries. Will you record a Loom video explaining what you did and what were the results? So this needs to be specified, and also updating the scorecards. As we said in the CEO dashboard, there are KPIs and people are accountable for them. So they need to actually keep them updated, right? So this will be the scorecard updates. That is a part of communication. Right? And also what I like to implement is the maker manager schedule, right? Essentially very simple idea. In the morning, maker sessions, deep work, moving the needle on big project, manager sessions where we communicate, check our emails, reply to messages and so on. So we try to apply this across the team. This should be a fixed, strictly for the founder and for the management, but it's great if everyone on the team actually follows the same rule. In the morning, it's of course people in different time zones, but in the morning, deep work, focused hours, that is the deep work time for our company. And then let's say afternoons are for meetings, discussing things, sending messages, and so on. So it's important to increase productivity like that. And now we are moving into the final section, scaling, focusing on what matters. Component number 1, strategy compass, right? Actually understand what to focus on, right? Where are we going? I call this the ultimate goal. We try to quantify what we are trying to achieve with this business. Maybe it's selling the business for a specific amount. Maybe it's achieve some other type of freedom. Maybe we want to work limited number of hours, whatever it is. In most cases, actually selling the business. So we just do the math, break it down, and understand where are we going, right? Important. Step number 2 is to map out and evaluate the opportunity, right? Look at what we can do, right? This brand can expand to Europe. They can launch new product lines. They can launch new brand. They can focus on new sales channels, D2C, Shopify. They can work with influencers. So many things. And if they pursue everything, well, then they do nothing. They get spread too thin. So actually sitting down and understanding where is the most opportunity for the business, right? This is up to the founder to use the ICE framework. Again, very simple. Evaluating each project. We first list them out and then use this framework to define how much it moves the needle. Again, estimating what is our confidence if we are sure that it will work, low, moderate, high, and effort. How much resources it will take, time, money, right? And then once we have that, we can choose kind of the path of least resistance to achieve our ultimate goal. I also like to always use this OKR framework kind of to get the logic behind it, not necessarily to implement OKRs as they are. As you probably know, OKRs are used by larger companies. I don't think it's necessary for most businesses to use this, but understand the logic behind it. And the logic is that the OKRs stand for objectives, key results, and initiatives. And it kind of always helps us break it down in a way that we understand that what the founder is responsible for, monitoring the key performance indicators and setting the objective, prioritizing, and then the key results and the actual initiatives are then defined by the team members, right? That is just the logic behind it. So every time he's thinking about big moves and big plans, he understands, what is his job and what is his team's job, right? His job is not to figure out how to increase listing conversion rates from 12 to 15%. That's not his job. His job is to understand that there is an opportunity to increase the profitability of their best-selling product by 25%. Right? So this understanding and implementation of OKRs, I believe, is sufficient for most businesses to kind of have the underlying framework. So once we do that, we have the strategy compass, we have the direction, right? We know where we're going. And lastly, we have the strategy rhythm, where we move from the prioritization to actual planning and execution. How do we bring those big ideas here to today? What are the actions we need to take? And we, of course, do that through the process of planning. So here, as you can see, we are looking at the same picture as with the meeting rhythm, because it's essentially the same thing. Combined, it's the business rhythm, what is done on a regular basis. At the bottom, we have the meetings. That is the team accountability. And at the top, we have the company direction. Yearly strategy workshop and quarterly strategy sessions. And again, strict agenda, how it's done, how often should be done, of course, yearly, every quarter. So this would be the strategy rhythm. And what is important is to really stick to this strictly. Because I see so many sellers, doing maybe the yearly, they just kind of do it because, it's already half of January and they create their yearly plan and so on. It's important to do this on a regular basis, strictly put it in the calendar, have the clear agenda that we are going to define strategic objectives for the next quarter and so on. But the idea here is that I hear a lot of pushback from sellers when it comes to a rigorous, strict planning system. They tell me that they like to be agile, new opportunities come up every day, so they need to be able to adapt. There is one rule I like to remember, the plans are pretty much worthless, but the planning is everything. The actual act of planning is where the value is, not necessarily the plan. You created your yearly plan and in March it already had to change. Well, that's fine, because the act of planning is reviewing what happened, learning, and then creating the plan. Because that is the important distinction, right? That is why we want to focus on the planning itself, reviewing, understanding, planning, prioritize. That's all important. So once we do that, we can then create, again, in our company wiki, the actual quarterly roadmap, right? I'm not getting into too much details because, of course, it's from the business. So we are looking at the template. So you see the roadmap, how things should happen in sequence, and that actually helps you steer the ship as the owner, right? Understand what your job is, setting up the objective, and putting the plans in place. So then the daily execution hopefully gets you closer to the goal. Now, if you want my help transforming your business like this, you will find a link in the description. And if we have spots open, you will be able to apply and book a call with me so we can take a closer look at your business and figure out the best way to implement this. It usually takes around 3 or 4 months to do so. So go ahead and check it now. And other than that, here is the next video to watch. I'll see you next week. Bye.